awfully dark. Maybe we should turn the overlight head on.
Overhead light, Mom.
Yeah. What do you call it? I'm going to admit you, John.
Oh, you don't need to.
Hi. Hi. Unmute. Yeah, there you go. Can you hear me?
Yep, I was working on it. Sorry. I didn't realize it automatically put me on mute, so.
Yeah, and I have to record. Yeah, it's recording this now. So I'm going to shut it off for a minute. We can start. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
This is Marion Wingfield from the Ames Free Library. And tonight we're really excited to be wine tasting. Good time of year, good time period. To be talking about early winter wines with Tina Cantor, who is a certified sommelier and owns a business called Happy Being Clean. And she does wine tastings and she's a wine wholesaler. And if you're lucky, you'll catch her at Whole Foods, where if you have any questions about wine, she's the one to go to. So without further ado, I know some of you bought wines and we're eager to hear about them and taste them. I'll hand it over to Tina. Thank you, Tina.
Thanks, Marianne. Thanks for the wonderful introduction. Thanks, everybody, for joining. Feel free to jump in at any point if you want to. We'll definitely have plenty of time for questions at the end, but if there's something specific you want to ask, please don't hesitate. As Marianne said, my name is Tina Cantor. I am a certified third-level sommelier. I live in Mansfield, and I do own a local business. I predominantly work with private clients now. I do wine tastings, as she said, and selections for special occasions. I do events both live and obviously virtually, from small tastings to corporate gatherings. I manage private collections for investors and investments, and I work with restaurants on wine lists locally and outside of the state as well. But basically, I love wine and I love to talk about wine. So enough about me. Let's actually talk about what we really want to talk about, and that's the wine. So a question I'm asked often is about the seasonality of wine and if it really is a thing. As the seasons change and the days get shorter and the crispness takes hold in the air, we tend to adjust how we dress and what we look for to comfort us. We may tend towards cozy wool sweaters and socks and fires in the fireplace and all that makes us feel cozy. Additionally, our eating habits change and we tend to creamier, richer, fatty, or umami-driven foods. And all of this reflects itself in our choice of wine as well, which is an emotional beverage. Seasonal wine has little to do with color, although that is a common misconception. I'm often told by people that they don't like to drink whites or rosés in the winter just because. And it's really not about the color of the wine. It's actually the texture and the weight of the wine that really counts. With the crisp, fresh whites and light, fruitier rosés and chilled reds headlining during the warmer summer months, and the heavier, richer, bolder whites and reds in the colder winter months. The increasing trend to eat seasonally makes it even more important to drink seasonally as well, because what's in your glass is just as important as what's on your plate. And therefore, the wine choices that you make should reflect both the time of year and the ingredients that you're using. Lighter, crisper wines meant to refresh the palate are more desirable in the warm summer months when eating lighter food, whilst fuller, richer wines accompany your comfort foods in the depths of winter. When talking about fall and winter wines, we often think of the impending holidays, most notably Thanksgiving, which is right around the corner, but also all of the religious holidays that exist between now and when the snow finally begins to melt in spring, and New Year's. Of course, everybody wants a nice bottle of bubbly during New Year's. There's some classic pairings for this time of year that I'd like to politely give a nod to and then move on to some more modern and, honestly, in my humble opinion, some more exciting wines to try. And we're going to do that today. We're going to start with Beaujolais Nouveau. So I don't know if any of you are aware, see if you can show you this, but today is a global holiday. It's Nouveau Day. On the third Thursday of each November, the Beaujolais Nouveau of that vintage is released. Historically, it was drunk by the vineyard workers to celebrate the end of the harvest in Beaujolais, which is just south of Burgundy, France. Geographically, it's in Burgundy. However, Burgundians will go to their graves denying that, but I digress. This tantalizing wine is fun, it's fruity, it's exciting, and it's supposed to be indicative of what the entire vintage will be like in France, although we know now that that's flawed. But I still have a tradition of running out to get it every third Thursday of every single year and opening the bottle and getting excited and blogging about it and posting about it, and I'll continue to do that. But it doesn't really tell you what the vintage is going to be like. Basically, it's 100% Gamay. It's done in a special way called carbonic maceration, and I'm going to try not to get overly cerebral, but it's a technical way of saying that the whole grape cluster, including all the stems, are thrown together in a big vat, and they're basically pressed underneath their own weight. No yeasts are added, and it's vinified just by nature. Natural yeast, everything happens in stainless steel, and then it's bottled and shipped. Within 60 days, it goes from being grapes on the vine to wine in your glass on the other side of the world, which I think is pretty spectacular. It's super exciting and fun to get a bottle and open it tonight. And then by tomorrow, I'm usually over it. And the excitement's done and I'm ready for the next glass of wine. But of course, I'm going to go through all that excitement again next year. If you've never had a Beaujolais Nouveau, generally you're supposed to drink them really fresh. Usually the goal is that stores are sold out of them by January. So if you get a chance, go get one. And if you go with the George Duboeuf, who was actually the wine producer that not invented Nouveau, but started really marketing it across the world, each year has a new hand-painted label, which can be really fun and beautiful and fun to collect. So Beaujolais Nouveau, in all of its excitement, is a hard act to follow, but if anybody can do it, it's Bordeaux. Classically, the first thing you think of when fall and winter rolls around is Bordeaux. All the wine stores do giant displays of Bordeaux. Every email you get from wine stores will send you emails about it's Bordeaux, 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 Bordeaux. They're big, complex, brooding wines that are either Merlot driven when they're from the right bank or Cab driven if they're from the left bank. They carry a ton of notoriety, and it can take years to truly understand this biggest region of France with its dizzying number of options in multiple classifications from innumerable chateaus, with labels that are written in French and incomprehensible. It can really cause your head to spin no matter how many years you've studied. Right now, I think, however, the marketplace has been really flooded with too many options, some incredible and some just okay. And for the lay person, not that I'm calling anybody lay, but for the average person, it is really hard to tell the difference. And you can't really go by label, you can't go by price point. And those are the two things that consumers usually use. So I tend to take a little break from Bordeaux. Next classical pairing is Pinot Noir. And admittedly, I absolutely love Pinot Noir. With its subtlety and nuance, its light-bodied cerebral character that is the truest reflection of terroir. It's usually a spectacular glass of wine. However, and I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, there has been an influx of less than prime Pinot Noir on the market as of late. Of note, Pinot Noir is the most expensive single varietal to grow. It's light-skinned, finicky, moody, easily affected by all natural and environmental situations, including climate change, and must be harvested at just the right moment to hit its prime of balance of fruit, minerality, acidity, and sugar. It's art. Burgundy, the birthplace of Pinot Noir, and still the region that produces the most spectacular examples, is known for its lighter-bodied, mineral-driven, highly nuanced and age-worthy wines, and they'll always be the go-to for me. Producers have been growing Pinot Noir for generations, and some Grand Crus are absolutely worthy of collection and be completely memorable. On the opposite side of the spectrum, we have Sonoma, specifically Russian River Valley, producing some fantastic fruit-forward Pinot Noirs. In fact, they're so fruit-forward that sometimes you'll be surprised they're Pinot Noir. And then we have the Willamette Valley, which kind of sits in between. It's a good counterbalance. It's a cooler climate than Sonoma, and thus it produced a slightly more acidic, less fruit-forward Pinot Noir, yet it doesn't have that incredible minerality of Burgundy, where the earth is a result of depositing of fossils and shells of ancient sea life from melted glaciers thousands of years ago. That can't be replicated, and to some palates, that can be pretty polarizing. So Willamette Valley balances the in-between of the fruit forwardness and the minerality very well. It falls right in between. And there's some great expressions coming out of Willamette Valley. So here's some of the unfortunate part of the story. Since our country has a love affair with oak, a lot of producers have started producing Pinot Noir in new oak barrels to impart some oak flavor on the Pinot Noirs. And in my opinion, that's a travesty. It ruins the beautiful subtlety and perfection of Pinot Noir. Also, producers are putting out much lower quality than they should in order to attain an entry-level price point. Because again, the varietal is so expensive to produce. So long story short, you can get a wonderful bottle of Pinot Noir, but you should really rarely pay less than $20 and know what you're buying. While I often say this, it's really important for Pinot Noir, stay away from mass-produced brand names. So let's get to the good stuff. Let's get to my what I think is the good stuff. Let's get to my recommendations and the wines that I think that you should try this fall and winter. The wine styles that I'm going to recommend today fulfill the categories that I personally think are important for this time of year. They're comforting, they're fuller and richer in body. They're great food wines because what do we love to do this time of year? We love to eat. They're easily accessible, both in terms of price point and finding them. And they're slightly off the beaten path. So not only will you have fun today, I hope, especially for those of you tasting, but you'll sound like a genius to your friends and family because you'll be able to name wines that hopefully they've never heard of. So the whites that we're going to talk about today are a Pinot Gris, a white Côte d'Aron, a white Rioja, and the reds are Priorat, Primitivo, and Barbera d'Alba. So let's start with a Pinot Gris. I love a French style Pinot Gris, which is also the style that you'll find in Washington State and in Oregon. While genetically Pinot Grigio is the same grape varietal, it's extremely affected by terroir, much like Pinot Noir or Sauvignon Blanc, which from different regions taste completely differently. It's the vinification process also that makes Pinot Gris different. First, Pinot Gris is harvested earlier to maintain more of that crisp acidity. So while there's some good fruit notes, there's less sugar in the must of the grapes. Often people say with Pinot Grigio that they find that it's sweet. There are some on the marketplace that are intentionally sweet, but generally Pinot Grigio is not intended to be sweet. There just happens to be more fruit in the must of the grape. Pinot Gris itself is fleshier, it's more unctuous, and for that reason, it makes it an excellent food wine. For me, for those of you who know me, I call Pinot Grigio Italian water. It tends to be very light, and there are so many less than stellar options on the marketplace. Unless you know what you're doing, I tend to avoid it. And I know what I'm doing. So there's a couple out there that are good, but it's very rare you'll see a nice bottle or a nice glass on a wine list. So Pinot Gris is different. So for those of you who'll be tasting along today, we have Lone Birch Pinot Gris from the Yakima Valley. This, I know you're going to see it in mirror form, but I can also send out a list of the ones that we're tasting for those of you who aren't tasting. So it's from Yakima Valley, which is in Washington State, and it's been producing some fantastic wines as of late. we're going to do an active tasting today. So this is a great learning for everyone, even those of you who aren't tasting. Active tasting is a methodology I use every time I taste. And now I do it more out of habit and focus. But when I was going through, and I'm still going through the stages of learning, practicing as a somm and continuing to learn and study. But in the beginning, you really go through every single step and write down exactly what you do. But for you guys, it's a great opportunity to learn about the wines and decide what you really love and what you don't. So an active tasting means we go through these particular steps. First, we look at the wine. So looking at the wine is a couple different things. You note the color of the wine. This wine, the Pinot Gris, is a light straw color. The next thing we do is we put it on the table. I'm doing this in the air, but normally you want to do this on table, and you swirl the wine around. And there's a couple reasons we do that. It's not to look, look like we're pompous or anything. It is really has a practical purpose. One, you want to see how the wine interacts with the glass. It's actually a chemical reaction when you get the tears, which are the little dots, or the legs that run down, or the sheets that run down. It's a chemical process called the Gibbs-Margoni effect, but I know that's too much. Sometimes I got to rein myself back in. But that chemical process shows you, or is indicative of how much alcohol is in the wine, or how viscous the wine is, which often means that it is a sweeter wine. If it runs really slowly down the glass, it's usually a thicker, more viscous, and ultimately sweet wine. If it runs down really quickly in sheets, generally that means it's higher in alcohol. So that's very interesting. The next thing we want to do is smell. So look, then smell. And we want to get our nose all the way in the glass.
Right in there.
And you get your nose in that glass and you kind of pull it away. This is a lovely aromatic wine. You get some notes of cantaloupe, some yuzu. I love yuzu. I'm really into yuzu. So anytime I smell it, I get really excited. There's some honeysuckle in there too, but it smells fresh, very, very vibrant and fresh. The next thing we want to do is taste, my favorite part. When we take taste into the mouth, you want to swirl it all around your mouth.
What I do.
So the things that we note first, we want to assess the level of sweetness. Sweetness is the amount of sugar that's left after it's been fermented out. So if it's dry, that means there's no more sugar. If it's off dry, that will taste a little bit sweet to your palate, but that means that there's still some residual sugar. This wine is dry. In fact, it's bone dry, which means there's literally no sugar left. It's nice and fruit forward, however, and sometimes that can be confused with sweetness. In terms of acidity, it's high. And you can tell acidity because once you swallow, your mouth begins to water. As soon as your mouth begins to water, that means it's got high acid. Tannins, there's none because it's a white wine. In terms of alcohol, you can assess that by after swallowing, how it feels in the back of your throat. Does it burn in an uncomfortable way? Does it feel nice and warm, smooth going down? Or do you not feel anything? That's how you assess. And then body. And when I teach wines, I compare wine to milk. Light body is like a skim milk. Then a light to medium will be like a 1%. Then there's a 2% and a whole milk. And that's a good way to kind of judge the body of the wine. This is a good, probably 1.5%. It's not quite 2%, but it's got some good body to it. And then you assess what flavors you had. Does it taste the way it smelled? And usually it does, because the aromas, your sense of smell is about 85 to 90% of what you taste. So for the most part, I think what we smelled is what I taste, but there's some crushed gravel on the palate that I didn't get on the nose. And I usually go back and taste again for the second time. I definitely get some crushed gravel on that, which is a nice minerality. And actually, once I smelled it after I tasted it, I realized I missed it on the nose. So that's the Pinot Gris. It's fun, it's crisp. It will do beautifully with food. particularly anything fatty on your table. Or if you have something sweet on your table, like sweet potatoes, it will go really well with. So the next white we're going to taste is a Côte de Rhône Blanc. And this is the one I've selected. It's a Bila Haute Côte de Rousson, which is Côte de Rhône by producer Michel Chapoutier. Michel Chapoutier is actually one of the largest producers in the Northern Rhône. This one's a wonderful blend of Marsanne, Roussin, and Viognier, specifically from the Languedoc-Roussillon subregion of the Northern Rhône. These are Rhônes, white Rhônes, are easy to find in the store and people often overlook them. They're spectacular in my opinion. They're a blend of several super aromatic grapes. So Marsanne, Roussin, and Viognier are very common. Also, Picpoul and Grenache Blanc are grapes that are allowed to be in there as well. And they're used in different vintages, in different quantities to create that beautiful balance. This is a lightly oaked yet zesty, zippy wine. And it should have some great body. So Roussin, the grape Roussin, tends to have an oily character. And I know that sounds bad, so don't, everybody's making a face. Well, I don't know if you are, but if you are making a face, don't be afraid of a slightly oily wine. It's wonderful. Often that means it sits on your palate a little bit longer and you get more of that delicious flavor. But so let's do an active tasting of this one as well. So I'm gonna swirl again. Looks like, again, pretty good level of alcohol, which means if there's good level of alcohol, it's pretty much dry. Great notes. I actually get that slight hint of oak on the nose, but I also get some like orange blossom, tangerine, maybe a little bit of lime. So let's taste it. It's got, like the first one, it's got one of those things I love. It prickles a little bit on your tongue. So some people think that's an effervescence. It's actually the level of acid. When something kind of dances on your tongue and prickles your tongue, that means it's fairly high in acid, and this has that. I don't know if you guys get that oiliness, but there is a little bit of oiliness. It's almost like after having a nice piece of salmon, you feel a little oiliness on the tongue in a great way. This does that and delivers it. But that it delivers kind of an apple pear note with the texture. So I like that a lot. It's very round on the palate while being crisp, which is nice. And the other thing I get a little bit is some salinity. I get a hint of salinity on the finish, which again means that it's great with food. Again, when you're seasoning food, a little bit of salt enhances the flavors. So finding a wine that has a little bit of salinity is fantastic. That's fun. So my third white, I did not introduce today because I was afraid of overwhelming, but I'm just going to mention it because it's a fun one to get. So something I would suggest. My third recommendation is a white Rioja, or rather a Rioja Blanco. It's a style of wine from the Rioja region of Spain, made entirely, obviously, with white grapes. The most important is a Viura, and the second is Malvasia. Again, Malvasia is a slightly oilier, heavier bodied white varietal. A straight Malvasia can be really, really heavy, but balanced with the crispness of a Viura is fantastic. This wine can actually range from light to full bodied based on the balance of the Viura and the Malvasia. And it's treasured for its ability to age 10 or more years. So Rioja Blanco wine, they can be exceptionally rare in the aged version, but in general, they only make up about 10% of the region's production. However, they're starting to be available in quite a few locations locally. So it's something great to try. They're great food wines. Most white Rioja is released the year after the vintage, and it's considered fresh, Joven style, which means fresh, or young, leaving just a few designated for that aging. And when they age, they develop a very nutty oxidative flavor and turn a deep, rich yellow. Fresh Joven Rioja Blancos tend to be a little bit lighter, darker in color than the two that we've tasted now, but not that deep, rich, almost dark yellow color that the aged Riojas are. The aromas are lean and citrusy. They have notes of lemon verbena and lime peel and honeydew. But what I like most about them for this time of year is they have a lot of notes of herbs like tarragon, marjoram, and then they have some chocolate minerality. But that herbaceousness is what I love with food, particularly with holiday meals. They're completely dry, but they burst with lots of with a lot of acidity on the mouth.
Yeah.
So those are the whites that I'm suggesting. Obviously, there's many more fantastic, but those are my three top choices for the fall. So let's move on to the reds. The first one we've got right now, or today, is a La Cartuja Priorat. La Cartuja is a great entry point into the flavors of Priorat. The wine's made in a very approachable style, and it's meant to be enjoyed young. It's very well balanced with alcohol and tannins, and particularly this one is made with completely estate-grown fruit. The Priorat region, as well as the Toro region of Spain, are both known for being completely biodynamic and organically grown grapes. However, many of them are small production wines, so they don't pay for the labeling. So it's just something that you know. These Priorats get aged in old French oak barrels for only 6 months, but that is just enough to impart a little bit of textural essence from the oak without imparting any flavor. Priorats are Grenache-based blends that have a touch of slate, so a touch of minerality. And you'll see a note that goes through this: Tina loves minerality in wine, because I often call that out or select wines that have that minerality. But these are they're mostly focused on fruity notes like blackberries and cherries. And they have an earthiness that kind of links that fruit with some firm, grippy tannins, but finishes really fresh. This particular one is 70% Garnacha and 30% Mazuelo, which is a Spanish name for Carignan or Carnena. So let's do the same act of tasting with these. We're going to swirl them around and look. It's got some nice legs, right? And legs are beautiful, right? And some good tears. So if you guys see some droplets on the glass when you swirl them around, this is a good example of tears.
Oh, yeah.
Tears, again, are part of that Gibbs-Margoni effect, which means that the alcohol, so it should be a little over 14%, in my opinion, my guess, 15%. So it's got a fair amount of alcohol, which is nice. It's a dark ruby in color. And let's get our nose in the glass. I see some of you guys drinking, so hopefully you've smelled it first. At least do me a favor and smell it first. So I owe you some really nice black cherry and some plum. And being of Danish descent, it's really wonderful for me to smell licorice in a wine, which this has some nice licorice notes. Also, I know somebody mentioned earlier that they like chocolate and like to pair chocolate with wine. This has got some chocolate notes in there, in my opinion. So let's taste it and see if we're right. First thing I get is some nice grippy tannins. So you get that the way you address tannins or you identify tannins is if the saliva seems to disappear from your mouth. You get almost sandpaper tongue, which is the technical term, yes. That means that there's a fair amount of tannin in there. Tannin is the backbone of a wine. If it's got good tannins, that means it is capable of aging. It actually needs acid as well, but anyway, it needs tannins. It can't age without tannins. Also, there's some nice acidity as well. So it's got one of those cool things that I love. It feels like the saliva is being dried out, and then it makes your mouth water. And that yin yang, I love in wines. I think it makes them really special. There's a medium alcohol, and the body is medium to full.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah.
It feels like I'll drink taking a sip of whole milk, doesn't it?
No.
It tastes better than whole milk, but
I know.
it fills your whole mouth. It
Mhm.
feels like it's got weight or depth. So that's that Primitivo. I like how it kind of makes my teeth feel dry. That's that tannin. I love that. All right. And the next one, the last one we're tasting today, but the second red pairing is the Senza Primitivo from Puglia, Italy. And many of you will be surprised to know that Primitivo is actually the Italian way of saying Zinfandel.
Oh,
While Croatia is actually the birthplace of Primitivo or in Zinfandel, Primitivo means early ripening. In Europe, Puglia, this region, the heel of the boot in Italy, is known for it. And other than a few notes, it can be almost unrecognizable from the Lodi Zin, which I call, you don't want to know what I call it, but it's a high alcohol fruit bomb. I will tell you what I call. I generally call them the Hollywood wines. It's all big up front, the hair, the makeup, the designer clothes, and then there's no substance. You take a sip, it's in your face, and then it's gone. Whereas a Primitivo has richness and substance and feels like it comes from a rustic town in Italy, which it does. So don't tell anybody that I say that about Hollywood. But anyway, so I love Primitivos. They are, for me, one of my favorite pairings for Thanksgiving because I think they do so well with the food. There's also another, if you love this, there's such thing in the Puglia region called a Primitivo Appassimento, which is, I don't know if any of you know Italian wines well. I will say that's where I did my stage and my studying, so I'm obsessed with Italian wines. But if you've heard of an Amarone and you know how big and rich they are, there's a special process that they use where they sun dry the grapes on straw mats and then press them. So they're practically raisins, and then they press them for the juice and ferment. They do that in Puglia as well with these Primitivo, and it becomes rich and almost chewy in a wonderful way. Anyway, let's get back to this Primitivo, which is wonderful. Let's swirl it. There's a nice deep garnet color to it. And the smell is just awesome. Scorched blackberries. I think of when I make homemade raspberry jam, I think of like a new leather jacket. You buy a new leather jacket and it smells so nice. And then I get notes of, and this is what makes me think holiday, I get notes of baking spices like cinnamon and nutmeg. All right, so let's taste it. Let's get in there. Big, bold fruit. I get blueberry first, actually. Blueberry, blackberry, some sweet tobacco. It's big. Not as much tannin as we had from the pre-rat. However, a lot of depth of flavor. You kind of get some volcanic rock notes too. It makes me think. So the way I get weird flavors is if I take a sip, it sends me to a memory. And that's often how I identify flavors, like a smell I remembered from my childhood, or I get a flash of standing near Mount Etna. That's how the flavor profiles often come out because I'm sent a flash in my mind of a memory of a smell or a taste. That's really, so Primitivo, I think, is the easiest drink with a holiday meal. It's good with pumpkin, it's good with turkey, it's good with cranberry, it's fruit forward and bold. It will appease a lot of people at your table, although we've probably all got very small tables. But there, you know, the family may have several different palates. This will appease several people because it's got kind of a balance of acid and fruit and tannin. And for me, and I think for aspiring enophiles, this is fall in a glass. I like that a lot. Hopefully you do as well. And finally, my final recommendation for today is actually one of my favorites. And I will say, I bought this to put at my table along with other different wines. And we will be drinking a Primitivo Appassimento as well, but a Barbera d'Alba. I love an underdog. And that's how I see the Barbera d'Alba. And that's one of the reasons why I love them so much. It's a wine that Italy never talks about. It's considered the wine of the people. While it doesn't have really the notoriety in the Piedmont, its Piedmont counterpart, which is Nebbiolo. You hear about the Barolos and the Barbarescos and the Dolcettos, all fantastic wines. But Barbera is actually the most widely grown grape in northern Italy. And it's also the most commonly consumed varietal in the area. So when you go and you stay with someone in the Piedmont region, they're serving you Barbera at home. They're selling their Barolos, but you're drinking Barbera there. The wine can be a bit of a conundrum. Again, that's something I love. I love overly cerebral wines that make me think. Due to its pigmentation, it can taste both rich and light. It tastes both rich and light bodied, and its pigmentation makes you think that it's going to be huge, but it's not. It's a medium body, but with great flavors. It offers berry and cherry notes in the bigger wines, but it goes down like a treat. It's really lively and acid, and sometimes it has that little dance on the tongue. It's got a nice long finish, which I call the soul of the wine, but it's not so long that you don't taste your food. And as someone who cooks a lot and spends a lot of time in the kitchen, it's important for me that my wines enhance my food, not overpower them. And that's one thing I think Barberas do really well. It's pretty low in tannin, yet high in acidity, which means it drinks super well with food, as I said, but it doesn't age well. Remember, I said about 2 minutes ago, a wine that's got high tannins will age well. It's medium bodied, notes of dark cherry, dried strawberry, violets, lavender, and that earthy dried leaves and anise notes. D'Asti and D'Alba are the most common subregions that grow Barbera. While slightly more expensive, but not enough to break the bank, I personally prefer the latter because it's a bit richer and deeper and has a long finish. For me, D'Astis tend to be a little bit too light and a little bit too acidic. So while there are other amazing wines and for the fall and winter options like Côte d'Aron, which I love, and Rioja, which I love, those are full tasting classes. So I didn't include them in this because it's too much information and I didn't want to overwhelm you. So I could talk forever about these wines, but I want you guys to have the opportunity to ask whatever questions you want. So I'm going to leave it here for my dissertation and let you guys open it up, ask whatever questions you want. Tell me what you think. If you loved the wines, you hated the wines, if you want to ask more questions about the wines, anything, it's open to you.
So people, yeah. So can I ask a question?
Anybody can ask. Go ahead. Yes.
I thought the Zenza Primitivo.
Yes.
Zenza had a very odd smell. It was this very confusing, and it smelled like vanilla and let me see.
Some sweet tobacco.
Yeah, I don't know if that, I mean, one of the things that puzzles me about being a sommelier and studying this is everybody has a different idea about, like, I would never identify anything as sweet tobacco. But you are saying that, and gravel, like that's not something that would come to me as an
Does it come to you after you hear it or no?
Yeah, I can see earthy, I can imagine, like dirt, or not dirt, but earth.
So if you ever walk outside after the rain
Mhm.
and you walk across like a gravel driveway or gravel, you know that smell, there's a unique smell to it. That's the note.
Yeah, I get that. Now I sort of get that. But I love this wine. I love the Zenza, and it's organic as well.
It's also organic, and they have great organic
That's the
offerings.
one you like better,
They
right?
pay for the labeling.
That's the second one. Yes, no, that's-
So I've had a couple questions that are common, so I'm going to answer them real quickly for you. So in terms of opening wines, yes, there is a way to open wines and not a way to open wines. And I will tell you first off that you do not need to spend $200 for a mechanical wine opener thingamabob. However, and I brought these to show because literally I answer this question every single time. Throw this away.
Did you see that, John?
There's a reason why you need to throw this away. Number one, if you want a broken cork, this is how you're going to get it. Number two, it takes a whole lot of the sensuality of wine out when you put this in and then you put the wine between your legs and rip the cork out. It's not beautiful. And it's way too much work. Spend $10, $12, $15 for a nice waiter's or sommelier corkscrew. You see this? This is the most important, amazing feature of a good waiter's corkscrew, because you put the corkscrew in, then you put this, you bend the elbow, and then you push the elbow in, and you use this on the lip of the wine. You see, you put this on the lip of the wine, push it in, and then you can pull it up halfway. Once you've got it up halfway, you can use this part and leverage the rest of the way out. It takes no muscle, and you'll get the cork out in a nice, easy, gentle way without breaking the cork. The other thing is, please don't ever put the corkscrew through the foil on top of the wine for a couple reasons. One, what if there's a glass cork underneath? What happens is you slip off and you stab yourself and you're going to the emergency room, and that's no fun. And number two, you notice how my wines don't have anything on the neck?
Oh, yeah.
I literally just pull the whole thing off. Actually, I'll show you on the Beaujolais Nouveau, because we have to drink this tonight because my husband will make us. You basically just turn, and you can pull the entire thing off, which is more difficult sitting, but the entire thing comes right off. 9 times out of 10, that's the easiest way to do it. If you decide you're going to cut it off, don't just cut the top off. Cut it down far enough so when you pour the wine's not touching the foil. And if you're in a restaurant, make sure that the person knows how to open a bottle of wine and the wine doesn't touch a foil, because it adds a metallic taste to your wine. So if you've ever tasted a wine, be like, ooh, there's some metal notes. That's the foil on the wine, not the wine itself. And also in pouring the wine, I've seen some questions about pouring the wine. When you pour the wine, there are ways a somm is supposed to pour the wine. However, if you see this little hole here, it's actually meant for your thumb.
I didn't know that.
Nobody ever knows that, right? So it's meant for the thumb. And when you pour, after you pour, if you give a quarter turn, it won't drip, or it's less likely to drip. But when you pour wine, you're supposed to have the label towards the person you're pouring. But if you're pouring for your significant other, I'm sure they don't care whether or not you pour it.
That's all right.
So
Don't mix up the glasses, honey.
questions. Yes, there are a lot of places to shop for wine. So Marion did mention, I spend about 15 hours a week being a part-time wine buyer and wine educator at Whole Foods. I am not here to sell Whole Foods at all. I'm there because I love talking to people, and I do so much private work now that I don't get to see people. So I spend time there talking about wine. If you want to go there to talk to me about wine, great, but that's not what I'm about. There are lots of ways to get great wine. There are a lot of stores. I will say we have one local store that I don't shop at just because I've never been treated well there. It's a personal thing. That's why I choose not to go there. But I like mom and pop stores that are small local businesses that actually employ people that know what they're talking about. Because the best
Shut
way to
everybody
get
now.
anything about wine is to talk to someone and tell them what you like and tell them what you don't like and have them direct you. Because no matter how much you learn from tastings, you can't learn everything. And if you have someone in a store that you can trust that can direct you, that's the best way to buy wine.
I have a very naive question. When it says a hint of blueberry or raspberry or licorice, those are not flavors that are added.
Correct.
They're just
There should never be, in a real wine, there should never be flavors added. In fact, there should be nothing added. There are wine spritzers out there with grapefruit or whatever added to it. And to me, that is a wine beverage and not a wine. A real wine will have nothing added to it.
So when you say it has a hint of blueberry or raspberry, is that from the soil of the grapes? Yep.
So that's a very good question. So very often when a wine grows in a vineyard where there's lavender growing, or Côte d'Aron is a great example. The ground covering is full of herbs, and you get these herbaceous notes in the wine. Or wines that have salinity, either they're grown close to the ocean, or like Burgundy, it was centuries ago, there were glaciers of salt water that melted and they deposited all this, these oyster shells and that sort of thing in the earth, and those notes come through the earth. So it can be in the earth, it can be in the environment around, it can be growing near, it could be the grape itself sometimes has a note of has notes of those, and it can be in the vinification process. Some things come out, some notes come out when the wine is being fermented or aged.
Thank you.
Does that help? My pleasure.
Oh, yeah.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
I know you don't like, the corporate brands, but is there any of the commonly seen brands of wine that you like?
So,
There's Woodbridge and others.
so I won't drink anything mass produced because to me, it's not wine. For me, a real wine is a wine that is grown in a vineyard with someone living on it, who is farming and tending to the vines and tasting the grapes and deciding exactly when to harvest at the right time, and then harvesting most often by hand and pressing the wine and tasting what's in the barrel every single day until it's just at the right time. For me, that's wine. A brand like Constellation Brands, which owns a whole lot of brands of wine, and some of them extremely expensive. Many of them buy juice or buy grapes. If you buy juice, to me, it's not wine. Just making juice alcoholic, to me, isn't making wine. Wine is an art form.
Mhm.
So long answer to your question. I won't drink mass produced because I would much rather buy a beautifully crafted bottle of wine that generally costs less. A lot of these mass production wines pay so much for marketing and labeling that you're paying for that. And you're spending the same amount for a bottle of Meiomi, which is $19.99, as you would for a nice handcrafted Pinot Noir. So I don't want to be offensive, but I'm nothing if not totally honest. I wear my heart on my sleeve too. So that's my answer. I would stay away from the Josh's Lacremas and, you know, Woodbridges and of the world, because you can get beautiful real wine for the same price.
So Tina, how do you recognize, I mean, I know this is really, how do you recognize mass produced? I mean, I know Mondavi, of course, Woodbridge, but what, I mean, what are some of the other ones that are?
So that's a good question. I promise you, if you ever see a wine advertised on TV or in a magazine that's not Wine Spectator, it's not owned by a winemaker. It's owned by a branding company. That's number one. Number two, if you find a wine or a brand of wines that makes 4 different varietals, it's not grown on a vineyard.
Like, can I ask you about Coppola?
So that's a challenging one.
Yeah.
So some of the wines are mass produced and some of them are not. So Sofia Coppola has a sparkling wine that's a handmade sparkling wine. And while I find it very expensive for the quality of the wine, it is a handmade produced wine. However, if you are going with, for example, Prisoner, you guys probably have heard of Prisoner. It's a $45 on sale. It's $29.99. It's owned by Constellation Brands. Constellation Brands, they don't make wine. And so you're spending a whole lot on that wine. So Coppola, there are some of their wines, their Claret. Their Claret is made on a vineyard.
I love the Claret.
It is made on a vineyard, and that's probably their most common wine. However, it's made in a vineyard.
Okay. And is there a way, I mean, I told you I read an article about how to read a label, a wine label. Is there a way to tell from a wine label whether it's made on a vineyard or it's a, you know, a branding company?
Sometimes. So often, if it's a mass-produced wine, it will say produced by.
Oh, okay. Mhm.
And if it says produced by and something that has the word brands in it, it's not a wine. But you can see anytime something says like estate bottled, that's one of the things that's regulated. You can't just write that.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
And then if you're in Italy, most things for example, Banfi has a whole lot of wines. Banfi is one of those that while it's a big brand, they buy from specific vineyards. So each brand or each wine, even though it carries a Banfi label, is made by a different family.
Okay.
A lot of that mass production stuff isn't allowed in the EU. It's common in the US. It's common in some New Zealand, like Kim Crawford and Oyster Bays are all mass produced now. They're actually owned by American companies. But it's most common in the US.
How are the Italian wines named, so to speak? Or how are the labels created? There's regional.
Yeah, so Italy
preference or
is
something?
really, really hard because each region has their own kind of jurisdiction. So in terms of Tuscany, even Chiantis, there are 8 subregions of Chianti, and each subregion of Chianti is allowed to label their wine a little bit different. Chianti Classico will have a rooster on it. Anything that's not Chianti Classico won't. And the aging requirements for Classico Reserva is different than an aging requirement for a Chianti Ruffino. So it's hard because there's a lot of information on there. However, most European countries have specific classifications that help you. And those can't just be bought. There's something that's really important. So in Italy, there's the DOC, which is the first level of higher quality. The next level is DOCG. That's the highest level of their quality classification. Within those, there's also reservas, superiores, grand reserve, all that. However, if something has a DOCG label, you know it's going to be good. And then for every rule, there's going to be outliers. So I can spend an entire day talking about Super Tuscans because that is an enigma. But that is an important classification. In France, there's very clear labeling laws. I mean, every minute detail on a French label is regulated based on regionality. However, you know that everything you see on the label is going to be accurate because it is audited. And the AOCs like Sancerre's or Châteauneuf-du-Pape or Chablis, those are super regulated. And if you don't follow all those minute details, you can't put that on a bottle. Spain, Rio has also similar. Crianza, Reserva, Gran Reserva. You have to follow specific regulations to put those on the labels. We don't have any of those regulations in the United States.
What were the Italian, like DOCG and
So it's
DOC?
DOC and then DOCG is the highest.
The two levels.
The two levels. And then there's a special level for Super Tuscans that says IGT. And that's only for
Debbie, did you want to ask a question?
I did. Tina, I love the Primitivo too. It is delicious. Why do I like it so much?
Me
It's
too.
a beautiful bottle. I've never seen a wine bottle like that. Where did you get it and how much did it cost? Can I find it anywhere or do you have to go somewhere special for it?
So to make it easy today, I bought all of these wines at Whole Foods. So they're all available. The Senza is one that is in a bunch of local wine stores that carry organic wines. So the difference is that this is an organic one. However, I will tell you, if you love this Senza, I picked it specifically because it tastes exactly like a Primitivo. So it is a quintessential Primitivo. So if you go and order a Primitivo off a wine list, if you love this, you will love that. There will be some differentiation, but it's not enough to be wildly different.
Okay.
So Primitivo is something that is available. And as said, there's a bunch of different types of Primitivo, but in general, it's going to be fairly similar.
Does it matter that it's organic or will non-organic taste the same?
So most of the wines in Puglia are organic. I just really like this and it's a beautiful bottle, but most of the wines in Puglia are organic. The difference is Senza, which produces a Nero d'Avolo, a Primitivo, and a Pinot Grigio. They pay for the labeling to be organic.
What do you mean? They pay for it?
So in order to be labeled organic or bio in Europe, there's a huge cost associated with getting the classifications, huge cost, and the certifications. And for example, Côte d'Aron is 100% organic, and none of them, except for one, Beau Renard a little bit, will pay for the classification because they assume the world knows that everything's organic from there.
So if I went to a store and bought that, how much would it cost?
It would cost probably about $16.
Not
Wow.
bad. It's a good
All of these wines are under $20.
Thank you.
You can get great wines under $20.
Someday, Tina, you'll have to come and do the over $50 wine class.
Well, I like that one too.
Just we want to know.
So one of the things I like to do, and by the way, I'm not a salesy person at all, but it's just something I offer because I don't do this to make money. But if it's something that someone likes, I'm happy to select wines for you if you give me a price point, and I can deliver them if it's local to, wherever we are. And I will deliver them to you you give me a budget, tell me, basically what you want to spend, how many wines, and I'll just deliver them for you. I do that because it's fun. It's not something I make money on. It's not something I do as a business. It's something that I enjoy. So if that's something you're interested in and want to try different wines, just email me. And I know that if people that love doing that will at some point, have me do an event for them later. So it's not a money making thing. It is truly just for me because I love wine.
In
And I
fact,
love to introduce people to wine.
Tina, you have some summer wines. We were going to do a summer thing, a summer wine tasting, and we paid you to buy wines, and we're still waiting for that moment.
I still have them in my.
I know, but I was going to ask you, I went to Whole Foods. I was wandering around in the wine section and Tina was there, and it was near my birthday, and I asked her to pick out a bottle for me based on something I liked. And Diane, you had some of this. And Larry, I think too. It was a delicious, had a bug. You told me it had a bug on the cover. What was it?
Yeah, Escarveas. It was a Côte d'Aron, a Resto actually.
Okay.
And I love it. Unfortunately, the entire vintage is sold out, so we can't get that specific one anymore.
That was the cheapest. That was the cheapest.
I absolutely love it. But there are Côte d'Aron is one of my absolute favorite regions. And I kind of grew up on Châteauneuf-du-Pape, so it's a little bit emotional for me. I drank it with my grandfather when I was 12, but I was in Denmark, so it's legal, so don't worry about that. But I love these wines, and they're so spectacular. So there's great ones.
Okay. So if you want to wander around at Whole Foods and run into Tina, no, really, when are you usually there?
I'm there Friday mornings. I'm there all day Sunday.
Yeah. Okay. I'm usually there Friday mornings, late morning, and I see you there. So, and it's great because if you just tell her what you like, she'll direct you to all these wonderful things.
Yeah, it's super fun, and I love interacting with people rather than just manage people's investments from my computer.
Now, am I the only one on this Zoom, this masterclass who wants to become a sommelier now? Has anybody been wondering what that would be like?
No, it's way too hard.
So if you really get the hankering, watch the documentary.
Yeah.
And you will change your mind because it's real.
Yeah. Well, it's romantic.
It is romantic.
It's romantic to think of going, to Italy and trying the vineyards in France, but I'm sure it's a lot.
Quite honestly, if you get to do what you love, it's spectacular. So I love every minute of it.
Yeah.
I'm going to watch some.
We were,
what about the age of the wine? Obviously, or not obviously, but whatever, the white wines are you don't want to drink one that's really old, I guess. I don't know what about that? Just the age of the red wine.
It's a very good question. Aging is very specific to certain wines. There are certain wines and varietals, so certain wine styles or varietals that are age worthy and others that are not. You can't say a blanket statement that wines aren't age worthy. However, there are very few whites that you really age. White Burgundies are one of them. You can get some amazing Montrachet that's aged for 25, 30, 50 years that are spectacular. But you're going to be paying $250, $300 for them. Sometimes it's worth it. But so there's certain white Burgundies, and I don't know if you know, but white Burgundies are always Chardonnay grape. Just treated completely differently. White Riojas are known to age incredibly well, 15, 20 years. Also, dry Rieslings from Alsace can age super long. And then some sweet or fortified wines, like a Sauterne from the Bordeaux region, will age super well. Those are the ones that really age well. The ones that are more crisp and lean and zippy, those are the wines that don't age well in terms of whites. When we talk about reds, again, if a wine has a great tannic structure and good acid balance, it will age well. Pinot Noirs, I often have people, and when I met my husband, he's not here, so I shouldn't say this, but when I met my husband, he had some Pinot Noirs that he loved. And they were like 15, 20 years old. And I was like, yeah, those are meant to age. He's like, but I love them, and wine is good old. It ages like fine wine. I'm like, not all fine wine ages. Some are meant to be consumed. Pinot Noirs are one of them, except, as I already said, in wine, for every rule, there's exceptions. There are some fantastic Grand Cru Burgundies that will age beautifully. But the wines that age super well are the Bordeaux's, the Thomas Jefferson Bordeaux's. Think of those. The Barolos from Italy, the Barbarescos from Italy, the Brunellos, which are my favorite of all wines. Grand Reserva Riojas age really well. Some California Cabs will age very well, we think. We don't know because the region's still too young. We don't have Thomas Jefferson wines from the United States yet. So we don't know if they can stand up to that test of time, but we think. So any wine that you love for a soft, gentle suppleness won't age.
My wife whines a little bit, but she's aging really well.
You can
Wait till we get off.
I said you age well. I have to ask you a question. Just tell you a story. We were in Italy, probably the last night we were there, and we were at a restaurant, and we just had the table wine, the Vino di Casa, I guess it was. And I wanted to bring some of that wine home. So I asked the waiter what kind of wine it was. So he went in the back in the kitchen, and he came back. He says, I don't know what it is. It's in a 5-gallon bucket. So it came from some local vintner.
Yep. And I mean, in Italy, first off, wine is, I started this whole thing by saying wine is emotional. It's one of the few foods and or beverages that you attach so much emotion to it based on the environment, the who you're with, the ambiance, that it changes the flavor of the product. So wine is one of those few beverages with that emotional connection, and that's one of the things I love about it. But if you're in an environment and you have your last night in Italy and you're having a wonderful dinner with your wife, and that wine
Who's aging well.
Actually, you didn't say if it was with your wife, so I made the assumption. That wine is going to taste better no matter what, because the emotional attachment, number one. And number two, the big secret in France and Italy and Spain is they don't export their best wines. They drink them. They're smart. They keep their best wines for themselves.
Well, that answers that question then.
Yep.
Diane and I are cousins, and our grandfather used to make his own wine in an apartment in East Boston, in the basement, which I don't even remember seeing. Nobody was allowed to go into the basement. And one day, Diane and I snuck into the closet where he kept his, jugs of wine, and we had little capfuls. Talk about emotion. And when we got out of the closet, our parents were laughing because it was okay to drink wine when I was, little. I mean, with them. We had wine with fruit. We had wine with, everything.
Bread.
They made us walk a straight line to see if we were drunk. How old were we, Diane? We're probably like 8.
I think we were like Lily's age, like 7. I think. Very naive.
Never forget that. They were dying of laughter, and it was really fun. So when you talk about emotional, it's like, my grandfather sitting there with a jug of red wine. He was a Sicilian. Nothing that would probably taste very good at this point, but
we liked it.
Sicilian wine has come a long way. So, I mean, there's some fantastic Sicilian wines that are imported now, or exported from there, but imported here. You can get a great value wine, and some of them are amazing.
So we'll just all show up at Whole Foods on a Friday morning, 10 of us.
I thought you were going to say Sicily and try the wine. Is it gravelly?
They're very volcanic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a lot, there's what, something like Frappato literally grows on the side of Mount Etna.
Of course.
And you get that.
I'll have to go back and try it.
Yeah. Well, Tina, it's late. I'm sorry. This has been so interesting and fun. Thank you so
Yeah.
much for doing this. And I really would consider, I mean, ask you to consider doing other ones like, you know, $49.99 and up. See what you can do.
I'm happy to do whatever you guys want to do, but I don't know how many sets of wines you guys are going to taste if I do the
$59.99.
exactly.
How about $7.99 and below?
Yeah.
I have
idea.
done a class of my favorite wines of, I think it was $15 and below. So I've done that before,
Mhm.
but it's not as fun.
No, it's not as fun. But
By the way, Tina, you said that you shouldn't say the thing about your husband because he's not there. That's the best time to say something that you don't want him to know about.
and she took
Just the
advantage.
opposite.
True.
In a public forum.
Yeah, this is recorded.
Yeah, even worse.
Oh, there's a question in chat and then we'll get off.
Yeah, so I'm going to type in my email address into the
Okay.
chat, but feel free to reach out to me at any time.
Yeah, Jennifer asked, what is the best way to get in touch with Tina? So certainly you can ask me at the library or you can take down her information here.
Yeah. And anybody that picked up wines today, you already have my email address, but I've put it here for anybody who did not. So, and if anybody wants to taste the same, that they felt left out, I'm sorry. But if you did feel left out, we can still get the same wines for you if you'd like.
Okay.
Thank you, Tina.
Thank you, Tina.
My pleasure. Have a
Thank you.
wonderful
It's
night.
fun.
Free Library.
Thank
Let's
you.
all raise a glass to Tina.
Thank you.
Very
Oh,
good.
cheers.
Now empty.
Oh, it's empty.
I've got 4 in front of me. So
I have some. Oh,
Thanks, Tina. We'll be in
be
touch.
We
mine.
won't tell your husband.
Yeah, I drank the last one through my nose.
All right, thanks a lot.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks for coming.